Previously, I showed you the queen versus center or knight pawn endgame. In this video, I will be talking about the bishop and rook pawns. First of all, why are they different? Well, let's look at the bishop pawns on the C and F files. It all starts pretty normal. We check to force the pawn to be blocked by the king. Now that they can't promote, do you know what to do? That's right, it's time to bring in our reinforcement, the king. Since moving here results in a pin, white moves their king to G7 instead. Now we continue with the process. We pin the pawn. We give a check. We fork the king and the pawn. We check to force the king in front of them. Wait, what? I bet 90% of you are confused. What in the world is this move? Can't we just take the pawn? Oh, wait a minute, it's stalemate. Some of you might argue that we can give some checks instead of taking the pawn, but we can never stop white from moving the king back and forth between these two squares, either threatening promotion or stalemate. One other try you might have considered was to bring the king closer, but he is not close enough, and white simply promotes and draws the game. So how can the side with the queen win against the bishop pawn, where the position of the pawn allows the stalemate trick to occur, and ultimately a draw? If you were paying attention to what I said 2 sentences ago, you would know the answer. The proximity of our king to the pawn decides the fate of the game. But exactly how close must the king be in order to secure the win? If our king is inside this box, crossed squares inclusive, when the king is on the side of the pawn where the stalemate tricks happen, we can win. We will take a look at how the game may finish upon the king being on F5, and afterwards D8. Here, the pawn has just been blocked, so we use this opportunity to bring our king into the box with king F5. Now after white moves up, we can once again take advantage of our king's proximity to the white king and pawn, and give one of these checks. While queen G6 may seem tempting, queen F6 is actually the way to go. The reason will be clear in just a bit. The only move that keeps the threat of promotion alive is king G8. Now we bring in the king to G6. This was the reason why queen G6 was not a good move. We needed to reserve the G6 square for the king, as it is the perfect post for the king to be on. First, you are putting some pressure on the white king by controlling these squares with the king. Second, it is the only square that allows the black king to get very close to the white king without the newly promoted queen checking us. And a bonus is that we attack the pawn twice, so an attempt to run with king F8 falls into instant mate. Now white promotes, feeling confident that the white queen can defend the white king from any threats, but that is not the case. Remember, because of our king's position, and even the white queen's position, you can visualize that the white king is in a box of some sort. Can you find the only winning move here for black? The move is queen E6 check, the only check, but happens to be a good move. Blocking with the queen doesn't work for white, so they move the king. Now what should black play? We swing the queen over to the H file, and afterwards, queen H7 checkmate is the end for white. But yes, of course, white can under-promote to a knight instead, because it is check. In this case, the plan is simple. We put the king on H6, keeping it close to the king, and also conveniently a square where the knight cannot put us in check. Now queen G7 is a checkmate threat, so white has to sacrifice the knight to defend. While taking the knight is tempting, we can instead play queen E7. We are not interested in the knight, but the king. With this move, we keep an eye on G7, basically freezing the knight in place. The only other moves white can make is king H8, but now queen H7 is another checkmate. Now we will see how white loses with our king on D8. It is very rare that a king is forced to end up on d8 in these kind of endgames, but it is possible, like in this case, a random rook on d8. Now we have to capture it and end up on d8. White moves to g7, threatening promotion. Now I want you to remember this diagonal check. Now white has 5 legal moves. If white moves the king to one of these squares, the king no longer controls the promotion square. Whenever this happens, you should control it with your own king, and since the white king does not control the promotion square, white cannot promote the pawn. If white defends the pawn with king g8, then we simply force it away with queen g5 check, and now we win the pawn and the game. If they get in front of the pawn, attempting to keep our king from coming in, we have a simple back rank checkmate. But the most logical move seems to be king g8, continuing the threat of promotion. Now we give a check on the g file. If the king moves to the h file, we can use our king to stop the pawn, and checkmate soon follows. The final try is king f8, voluntarily blocking the pawn but setting up a trap. If you play king d7, attempting to bring the king around this way, you fell for white's trap. It is a stalemate. So the best move is to step back to give the king some breathing room. Now it isn't possible for black to win the game. Just kidding. Now that you have seen how to either draw or win in bishop pawns versus queen endgames, it's time to move on to the rook pawns. The situation is very similar to the bishop's pawn. After forcing the king to block the pawn, if we just bring the king closer, this is actually stalemate. It doesn't matter what kinds of checks we play. The king will always dance between these 3 squares, always threatening promotion or stalemate if the queen is on the b file and the king in the corner. Because of this, the game is a draw. The only chance the side with the queen has to win is if something like this happens, where the king walks into its doom, or moves too far away from the promotion square, and allows the queen to stop the pawn. But this will almost never happen in your games, so how can we win? Similar to the previous endgame, the proximity of our king can help us win. Just how close must the king be? The king has to be in this box without the pawn being able to promote. Let's see it in action, starting with the king being on d5. Now that our king is close enough to the pawn, we can win. But how exactly can we do it? We simply have to maneuver our queen over to the same rank as the pawn, with the black king directly next to the promotion square, in this case, here. It will make sense why we want this later. So we start the maneuver with a check on the back rank. The king has to continue to defend the promotion square with this move. Now we get our queen on the same rank as the pawn with check, and your queen is now in position. You may think, okay, positioning the queen is easy, but how in the world can we force the black king to b1? It's actually easier than it seems. The king has only 4 moves to continue defending the pawn. Blocking the pawn is bad for them, because the queen doesn't control b1, so there is no stalemate tricks. Now we can simply bring the king closer. Now the king is forced to b1, and we just keep approaching with the king, ignoring the promotion. It is the same as the previous endgame. The threats created by the queen and king are much more dangerous than the threat of promotion. If black promotes, we have an easy checkmate. But of course, black has the option of a knight under promotion, giving a check. With reference to the previous endgame I showed you, can you remember how we can avoid annoying checks from the knight with our king? We put the king diagonally opposite the knight, 1 square in between. At the same time, we stay close to the king, which as a result, keeps queen b2 checkmate alive. Since king c1 falls into queen f1 checkmate, the only move to avoid checkmate on the next move is to sacrifice the knight. We simply take it and win it. Moving to b3 or a3 leads to the same outcome. We control the promotion on the diagonal, which also deprives the king on the b2 square, the only way the king could have defended the promotion square. Afterwards, we can block the pawn with the queen and it's game over for black once the white king arrives. This means the only good move is king b1. Look at that! We have already forced the king where we wanted it to be. Now that everything is in position, we will simply walk our king to b3, just like the previous examples. But wait, the queen promotes before the king reaches b3. What do we do? We pretend we do not see it and just move to b3 anyways. The king and queen create some dangerous checkmate threats. If you look closely, the black queen can't give any good checks to draw the game. It came down to the black king blocking it on the back rank, and our queen controlling the last toe checks on the 7th rank. So after black makes a random move to try and stop some of the checkmates, we are not even going to take the queen, but rather go for the mate. The last try is to under-promote to a knight, to stop king b3, but we have king c3 once again. This is the exact same position as last time. The knight sacrifices and we checkmate. That was a lot to take in, but if you continue to practice, you may get the hang of it soon enough. With that, see you in the next video.